Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 119, Captain Porter. Simon Fahey Porter was a 28-year-old teacher who loved poetry when he enlisted in World War I. He was born on the 4th of September 1886 in Eton, Queensland, the son of John Porter and Mary Fahey. John Porter was Irish and he married Mary Fahey in Goulburn, New South Wales on the 30th of July 1871 at St Peter and Paul's Cathedral when he was 30 and Mary 23. Mary was also Irish and came out as a servant with her mother Catherine on the 1st of August 1863. Her father Simon had died when she was 9. Several of Catherine's siblings had also emigrated and settled in New South Wales. Her mother remarried to Matthew Pennington in Goulburn in 1865, however he died only a year after their marriage. Matthew was a publican at Binder. It says in the will of Matthew Pennington, late of Binder, farmer, deceased, that the probate of the last will of the above-mentioned deceased may be granted to Patrick Leonard of Mummel in the colony of New South Wales, farmer, and James Leonard of Bungonia, farmer, and James Leonard was one of Catherine's brothers. The Tullys, the Fays and the Brodricks were all from County Galway, where the Leonard family also grew up, and they settled around Crookle. And the Tully and the Brodrick families were here prior to the Leonards, so it's quite likely that those families encouraged the Leonard family to migrate, and in fact they actually sponsored quite a few family members to emigrate from Ireland. Patrick Leonard, he sponsored Catherine and her 5 children to help them make a start at Grabbingullen. And James, Margaret and Patrick Leonard arrived in Sydney on the ship the Lloyds. Patrick was a widower whose wife had died in Ireland and he had 2 of his children accompany him. So Catherine Leonard's siblings who emigrated to Australia. So Patrick, as mentioned, he was born at Woodford, Galway, Ireland in 1815. He married Bridget Shaughnessy at Kilcloon, Batterstown in Ireland on the 6th of February 1837 when he was 22 and Bridget 18. They had 4 children and Bridget died in 1849 when their youngest child was only 1. Patrick emigrated on the 29th of June 1850 and as mentioned with 2 of his children. He then married Margaret Teresa McCabe in Goulburn on the 3rd of May 1860 and they went on to have 9 children together, 5 surviving childhood. Patrick died in September 1878 and the following was recorded in the Goulburn Herald and Chronicle. Drowned in the Wallandilly. An inquest was held by the district coroner at Mummel on Sunday last on view of the body of Patrick Leonard. John Cole, farmer at Bawbaw, stated that on last Wednesday afternoon he saw the deceased driving a spring cart in Clinton Street. He appeared to have been on his way home and to have turned back for something he'd forgotten. 2 hours afterwards he'd heard he was drowned. Isabella Cole, wife of the last witness, saw the deceased crossing the river and noticed that when approaching the opposite bank, the horse appeared to be unable to take the cart out. He seemed to get against the bank at a place where it was very steep and a little below the proper crossing. The current turned the horse down the river and carried the horse and cart down the stream. Leonard remained in the cart and was carried by the stream out of sight behind the bank. When again seen, the cart was upside down and Leonard had disappeared. The horse was on its back struggling in the water. This was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The river was high. Persons had crossed on horseback in the morning, but none in the afternoon when the river had risen very quickly and it was too high to cross safely. In going into Goulburn in the morning, the deceased probably crossed the river lower down at Mr. Rossi's. George Slater, saddler at Goulburn, assisted Trooper Pritzler in searching and dragging for the body, which was found on Saturday evening in a large waterhole opposite Mr. Harris's, a mile below the Bawbaw crossing place. The body was not disfigured. The jury returned a verdict of accidentally drowned. The deceased was 57, a native of County Galway, Ireland, and leaves a wife and 5 children, 4 sons and a daughter. In connection with his daughter's marriage, he'd been making purchases in Goulburn, and when returning home he lost his life. Catherine's sister Maria was born in 1821 in Ireland. She arrived on the 18th of September 1841 on the ship the Forth to New South Wales, and she died on the 6th of May 1906 at Forest Hill, New South Wales, aged 85. James was born in 1832 in Ireland. He arrived on the ship Lloyd's, aged 19. He was a farm labourer, and he married Catherine Blake in Goulburn on the 21st of September 1854, and they had a total of 16 children. He died at Bungonia, New South Wales on the 21st of August 1898 at the age of 66. And there were 2 articles referring to his death. An old and respected resident of the Bungonia district has passed away, Mr. James Leonard Farmer of Gerrara. The deceased had been ailing for some time, and death took place at his residence on Monday morning. He leaves a large grown-up family, many of whom are settled in the district. One of his daughters went to Paris some years ago and entered a convent. And another article says Mr. James Leonard's death was a painful surprise to many, the immediate cause of death being syncope. And syncope refers to a sudden change in the blood flow to the brain, so fainting or passing out. The deceased was 66 and arrived in Australia 49 years ago from Clonoon, Galway Island. By industry and perseverance, he amassed a competence, and his homestead has ever been a picture of neatness and comfort. Though at times brusque in manner, he was a generous friend and neighbour, and a man of strictest integrity. Such men being rather uncommon, his loss will be severely felt. His widow and large grown-up family lament the loss of a good husband and father. And Catherine's other sibling that came out was Bridget Leonard. She was born in 1837 in Ireland. She emigrated on the 5th of December 1863 at the age of 26 on the Hotspur, and her brother James was her sponsor. John and Mary Porter settled at Eaton, Queensland, near Mackay, farming on a property they called Clonoon Farm, and had 10 children, with 8 surviving childhood. John Porter was recorded as being the publican of the Union Hotel in Wood Street, Mackay, in 1875 to 1877. The building was apparently blown down during Cyclone Eline in 1898. Reminiscences in 1932 stated that the licensee by the name of MacDonald was killed in the hotel through the exploding of fumes in a nearly empty brandy cask, which he was investigating with a measuring stick with the aid of a lighted candle. John Porter was also the publican of the Horse and Jockey in Mackay from 1878 to 1888. And in another reminiscence in 1947, it says the Porter brothers of Eaton, who are descendants of Mr. J. Porter, also settled on or near the Barry Estate. John conducted the Horse and Jockey Inn at its inception, and the Porter brothers were well known in the athletic world and successfully competed against the best in their day. Mary Porter died in April 1891, aged only 43. Their eldest daughter Annie was 18 when her mother died, and she took on the parenting role as the youngest child was only 5 months old. John Porter died at Eaton on the 11th of July 1908, aged 67. And their children, as mentioned, their eldest was Annie, and she was born Anne Maria Porter on the 4th of December 1872 at Eaton. She married John Dibble, an Englishman who was a baker in Sydney in 1896 when she was 23 and John 29. They had a daughter, Dorothy, in May 1899 who did not marry, and John Dibble died in March 1908. And it mentions in his probate that the will of John Dibble, late of Elizabeth Street, Sydney, Baker, deceased, that the probate of the will may be granted to Robert Alexander Dare, the sole executor named in the will. So interesting that Annie was not the sole recipient of her husband's will. Herbert Dare was a flour merchant. So it is quite possible that John Dibble had made a will prior to his marriage to Annie and didn't update it, and that remained as Herbert being the sole beneficiary. And Annie died at Clovelly, New South Wales in June 1966 at the age of 93. The second child, John Porter Jr., was born on the 17th of September 1876 at Eaton. John farmed on the family property, and he died in Sydney on the 2nd of December 1962 at the age of 86. The third child, James Joseph Porter, was born at the Lagoons near Mackay, Queensland, on the 12th of June 1878. He married Florence Celestine Dunn in Queensland on the 20th of May 1911, when he was 32 and Florence 22. They had 2 daughters, and he also farmed on the family property, and he died at Eton on the 20th of February 1957 at the age of 78. The 4th child, William Porter, was born on the 13th of July 1880 at Eton. He married Rebecca Lollo in Queensland on the 20th of May 1920 when he was 39 and Rebecca 29. They had 2 children, and William died in Queensland on the 14th of September 1967 at the age of 87. William's son was named Simon Fahey Porter after his uncle. He was born on the 4th of May 1925 in Mackay, Queensland, and he enlisted in the RAAF in World War II on the 3rd of June 1943. He was a bank clerk at the time of his enlistment, working at the Union Bank of Australia at Mackay. He was a radar mechanic and leading aircraftsman who served in the Northern Territory and Southwest Pacific, and he was discharged on the 6th of March 1946. The 5th child in the family, Michael Porter, was born at Eton on the 18th of July 1884, and he died at Clovelly, New South Wales on the 8th of October 1956 at the age of 72. Simon Fahey Porter was born on the 4th of September 1886 at Eton. He was the 6th child of the family, and in 1908 he was teaching at Ingham in Queensland. And on the 11th of September 1915 it states, recruits from Mount Morgan include Mrs. A. Anderson and S.F. Porter of the teaching staff of the high school and the Red Hills State School respectively, who have been accepted for service with the Expeditionary Forces and were tendered a farewell by their friends in the Grand Hotel. They were the recipients of some nice presents, and hearty good wishes were expressed for their future. Mr. S.F. Porter is the second youngest son of the late Mr. and Mrs. John Porter of Clonoon Farm, Eton, and was born there. He attended the Eton School, became a teacher, and passed on to a more important position, followed by the good wishes of his pupils, their parents, his teachers and friends. These good wishes will still follow him in his new field of work, where doubtless he will add an honour to his name and birthplace. So Eton State School was 30 kilometres west of Mackay, and according to his great-niece Mary O'Neill, Simon Porter was admired by many of his students. When Simon enlisted, he was 28 years old, and from all reports, Mary said he was quite a gentle man and a very brave man. He was awarded the Military Cross for bravery. He led his men into battle, and they captured a particular post, and he was outstanding in the soldiering that he did. When the realities of war became too much, Simon had an escape route. Simon liked Alfred Lord Tennyson poems, and the family are aware of this, as when his effects were sent back from the war, in the kit bag, along with handkerchiefs and a tobacco pouch and items of clothing, was a book of Lord Tennyson's poems. So Simon enlisted on the 1st of December 1915 in the AIF as a second lieutenant in the 15th Infantry Battalion, and they embarked from Brisbane on the HMAT Wandilla on the 21st of December 1916. On the 14th of March 1917, there was a small article titled A Close Call. Our Eton correspondent writes, a letter just received from Lieutenant Porter of Clonoon, Eton, mentioned that he had one of the stars shot off his shoulder strap recently in an attack made by the Australians against the Prussians, in which the Australians were victorious. However, only 5 months later, his close calls came to an end, as on the 7th of April 1917, he was recorded as wounded with a gunshot wound to the knee. Then on the 11th of April 1917, it was announced that he was promoted from second lieutenant to lieutenant. On the 20th of October 1917, he was promoted to captain. And then on the 9th of July 1918, he suffered a shotgun wound to his chest and his back. He was shot during the Battle of Hamel, which took place in northern France. Unfortunately, these wounds resulted in Simon becoming a paraplegic, and he was hospitalised and died of pneumonia on the 25th of November 1918 in England, only 2 weeks after the end of the war was declared. Just a month after he was wounded, he was honoured with a military cross from the fighting at Broadside Ridge for his conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty at Zonabiki on the 28th of September 1917. He was in command of a company during an attack and led his men with splendid courage and coolness to the final objective. He consolidated the captured position most skillfully, and his cheerful bearing and fearlessness were a splendid example to his friend throughout. And the death of Simon was announced in the paper, death of Captain Porter. The sad news was received today that Captain Simon Fahey Porter, MC, had died as the result of his wounds. The information was cabled to Mr. J. H. Lamdager by Mrs. H. G. Wheeler. Captain Porter was on the teaching staff of the Red Hill State School and went into camp as a private about 3 years ago. His previous military training enabled him to quickly secure a commission, and on arrival in France he soon rose to the rank of captain. He was awarded the Military Cross for bravery. Later he was seriously wounded, and for some time he was in hospital with the lower part of his body being paralysed. Captain Porter was 30 years of age and highly thought of by all who knew him. The flags at the various schools were flown in half-mast as a mark of respect to his memory. His sister Annie wrote to the Army requesting his military cross, but she was refused as the Army said it needed to go to his closest male next of kin. And the reply letter on the 18th of June 1919 states, "Dear Madam, I have to acknowledge the receipt of your communication concerning the military cross awarded to your brother, the late Captain S.F. Porter, MC, 15th Battalion, and to state that in keeping with the provisions set out in the Deceased Soldiers Estates Act of 1918, the above decoration will have to be handed to this late soldier's brother." And the response letter from Annie? From 460 Elizabeth Street, Sydney, on the 26th of May 1919, it says, "Major J. McLean, Dear Sir, in reference to yours dated on the 25th of May 1919 regarding next of kin of the late Captain S.F. Porter, 15th Battalion, I beg to let you know that I am the eldest sister of our family. My father and mother are both dead. I have brothers all younger than myself and can give you their names and addresses if required. Hoping this information will meet with your approval, I beg to remain yours faithfully, A.M. Dibble." And on the 11th of June 1919, it states, "Dear Madam, with reference to my communication to you regarding the regrettable loss of your brother, the late Captain S.F. Porter, MC, 15th Battalion, I am now in full receipt of further advice which shows that he was accorded a full military funeral, firing party, band, bugler, and pallbearers being in assistance. The coffin, good plain oak, was draped with the Australian flag and surmounted by beautiful wreaths, sent from I. Porter, Mrs. A. Wheeler and Miss Wheeler, 15th Battalion officers, Mrs. Willsmore, Mrs. Davy and family, Captain Glasgow, 15th Battalion, and Miss L. Dibble and others." The last post was sounded at the graveside and Reverend Father Murphy officiated. Brother Isaac Porter, AIF France, Mrs. Wheeler, Mrs. Willsmore, Nurse Birch, Captain Drain, Lieutenants Ray, Taylor, Stevenson and Farrelly were present at the funeral. Administrative headquarters AIF London were represented, and the grave will be turfed and an oak cross erected by the AIF London. So it was lovely that at least he had his brother there attending the funeral so far away from home. The seventh child that was just mentioned, Isaac Leonard Porter, was born on the 12th of January 1889 at Eton. He enlisted in World War I on the 1st of September 1916 at the age of 27. His sister Annie was also his next of kin, and the occupation at the time of his enlistment was a baker, so he quite possibly was working for his brother-in-law. He embarked on the 11th of May 1917 and proceeded to France after disembarking at Plymouth, England. He returned to Australia on the 1st of September 1919. He married Irene Maud McLean in 1922 in Sydney when he was 33 and Irene 23. They had no children, and he died in Sydney on the 12th of January 1983 at the age of 94. And Mary Porter, the eighth and youngest child, was born on the 21st of November 1890 at Eton. She married Thomas John Shannon on the 8th of April 1928 in Sydney when she was 37 and he was 43. They had no children, and Mary died on the 6th of June 1975 in Sydney at the age of 84. So you would have noticed that the Porter family were blessed with good genes. Other than Simon, every other sibling survived well into their 70s and 80s.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.